All right, so you got some heavy chamfers, but we'll take a look back at that in a minute. Got your ball burnisher over there?
Yes.
Okay, so looking down the facial wall, pretty heavy, huh? So you're more like at millimeter 0.3 or 4 instead of just 1. You angled really steep right here.
Yeah, I was trying to give maybe the direction was wrong to give that.
Yeah, and then we're going to have to look at the tapers pretty carefully too. Now, chamfer is pretty heavy, and now when you have a heavy chamfer, most of the time you're going to end up with a ski jump. The heavy chamfer, the end of the burr gets inside the tooth, so that's a ski jump right there. The ball burnisher doesn't slide off. Slides off here, but not here.
Not on the...
Yeah, right here. Yeah. Over here it's okay. We'll take a look at the angulation of the shoulder in a minute, but if you have a ski jump,
It's over.
it breaks. See the way it broke off? Yeah. If you have a shoulder that's not angled gingerly, so you see over here, that's like a ski jump where your shoulder wasn't angled. Shoulder needs to be angled like this. So that would break off too, and that would probably be enamel there, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So then you'd have an open margin on your crown. It's better on this side. Okay, let's take a look at the facial taper. So we're going to compare it to the adjacent tooth this way. So here's the middle third that we want. So you're leaning out a bit. See that? Here's the angle you want, right down to the shoulder. That's probably why your shoulder got so heavy.
Oh, okay.
And by the way, this is horizontal. This is a nice angle for the shoulder. That's way too steep. So when it's that steep, you can't really get strong enough porcelain at that margin. So we'd have to re-angle that shoulder at a less angle so it makes the porcelain more strong.
How do we do that?
I'll show you. And then the secondary plane would be this angle, so you're a little bit over tapered on the secondary plane. You take all the angles from the adjacent tooth that you presume you're going to make the crown fit. Okay, so if we have a steep shoulder, the way to fix that is to take the 837 again. We're going to cut half the shoulder away.
I tried that, but then
Yeah.
I was in the ginger.
So choose the right taper, then cut into that shoulder about here. Okay, so if we make a new shoulder at this different level here and make a little step, then we can use your same margin, but from that area to that margin, it doesn't have to be as steep. So we cut half the shoulder away and then re-angle it, and then the shoulder is not as steep, and that'll work better. Okay. And it almost makes the shoulder look a little smaller. Okay. But anyway, leaning out is always a challenge, so you're not so bad over here, but over here when you lean out, you're probably going to get an undercut. Incisally, you got a funny looking incisal edge, huh? Should be a little flatter across here.
Mesial side.
Yeah, so look, just flatten it out a little bit, you'll be okay. Your clearance is clearly not enough right there, huh?
Sorry.
So reduce more up in this area and down the marginal ridge over here. Now, if I look down the wall here, I can't see the wall here at the same time. Okay, so we're going to have to make sure we check draw. So this is pretty undercut right here compared to there. So taper the walls at the chamfer. Keep the end of the burrs at the margin a little bit more so the chamfer's not so heavy. But come back and change these tapers a little bit more. And then you'll probably get closer to getting some draw. But right now there's undercuts in a variety of different directions. And you can try to re-angle the shoulder here and get rid of that chip that broke off. Lean the burr like this when you're angling that shoulder, and then try to come back with your chamfer. Even if you have to hold the gingiva down and fix the chamfer to get rid of the ski jump, if you have to go subgingival, just hold it down with your left hand and then use the handpiece like that to drop that margin gingivally. All right, see how that works out. Okay.
So I'll work on the same one.
Yeah, let's do all those things, and then we'll take a look at it again, and then we'll start on the canine. Okay. Okay, so just getting started.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we're checking your depth cuts for the most part, but looking down here, Okay, so you're a little heavy here, huh? So see how much axe reduction you have at the shoulder? It's about 1.2. This is about 1.3 or 4. This is not enough. So make your depth cuts closer to the adjacent teeth. Don't make your chamfer that heavy. Make sure you lean the burr toward the axis, not away from the axis when you're doing the axe reduction. That's why you're getting ski jumps, is because you're leaning the burr the wrong direction. The facial taper compared to the adjacent tooth. Okay, almost, except for the bottom you have a different angle. We want to have this taper all the way to the shoulder.
Okay.
So here's the taper you want, right to the shoulder. So don't do a different taper at the gingival third. Middle third, right down to the shoulder. The secondary plane is going to be like this angle in the incisal third. So don't do a different angle in the gingival third. And then let's make a much more definite depth cut right here and make sure you have the burr leaning toward the axis. And get it closer to the adjacent tooth. And just make the depth cut and stop when you have a millimeter at the bottom. And then a little bit more over here too. Make a very well-defined shoulder right at the bottom that's got a definite millimeter there. Then when you connect them together, then you can angle the shoulder. But don't put too much angle. And angle it all the way to the axial. In your case, your axial is pretty deep, so you might not quite make it all the way there. Okay, but you know, we're starting to get something we can live with here. Make sure you get the taper, make sure you have the axe reduction at the shoulder, make sure you have a nice angle to the shoulder. Now, when you go back and make the chamfers, keep the end of the burr at the surface, and don't lean the burr this way. Lean it a little bit toward the axis, but keep the end of the burr at the surface all the time. So you're getting ski jumps and all kinds of things here. Okay, but the big problem is the taper. Okay, so work on that some more. Okay? Okay. All right.
I started with canine, then I.
Okay. Well, whatever. Okay.
No, this.
All right. So your axe reduction at the shoulder here, pretty close to a millimeter. Over here, not quite enough. Over here, not quite enough. The taper on the facial. See, it's kind of rounded. You see that? So we don't want rounded. Rounded usually means undercut at the bottom. So you're making a shoulder by cutting underneath that wall instead of moving the whole wall in. So here's the taper you want, all the way down to the shoulder. Don't do the gingival third at a different angle. And your shoulder might be a little steep in some of those areas, so we're going to be careful about that too. Do you have a little white diamond cleaning stone in there, in your tray?
No.
I wonder where it went. Every tray used to have one. Oh, good, thank you. You have a stone like this that you can use. Okay.
Only this one?
Yeah. All right, so here's the taper, middle third right here. Let's do that taper all the way to the shoulder. There's the taper. Lock that in. And use that same taper right down to the shoulder. Every time. Make sure you get that perfect taper. Secondary plane will be up here, but you're going to do that after you finish the incisal reduction. So right now your incisal reduction's a little less than a millimeter probably, maybe about a millimeter. Let's get 2 millimeters right off the incisal edge. Okay. Now let's make sure we get the depth cuts in these corners a little stronger here, a little stronger over here. With the burr leaning toward the axis, definitely toward the axis. Keep it as uniform as you can from one embrasure around here and then into the other embrasure over here. So the more uniform it is, everything's going to work out a lot better. Then we angle the shoulder. You're a little bit subgingival here. So in this case, to angle it, I have to push it down a little bit, hold it down a little bit. Don't get too much angle, but make sure that it's definitely angled. Again, if the burr is parallel to the outside surface, then it gives you a fine angle. That works just great. Okay, so at this point, you're looking reasonable on the facial here. You might want to angle this a little bit more definitely here. Again, check it with the ball burnisher, make sure it slides off. Okay, the chamfer is pretty irregular. You came through the proximal and you don't have a chamfer in the proximal, right? So it's best just to use the chamfer burr and go through the proximal and keep the end of the burr at the margin, then everything works out great. Can't help it. But see, you don't really have much of a chamfer there. The end of the burr is way outside the tooth. So look this way, so you know where the end of the burr is. And keep it right at the surface, all the way along here. Make sure you always see the end of the burr at the margin, and then onto the shoulder as well, as long as the shoulder is angled. So that side looks pretty good. You see you're getting a little bit over tapered and kind of a heavy chamfer, and then a weak chamfer over here. So again, look along these walls so you see where the end of the burr is at all times. And you can come along here, I'll let you do that part. Okay, so once you've got that done, then you're going to reduce the cingulum to have a wall here that's about 1.5 millimeters tall. So you have a lot more to reduce, but some of the cingulum's been reduced because of the over tapering on the lingual. So again, when you do the lingual reduction, don't look this way. Then you're going to over taper. So when you're doing the direct lingual, look this way so you know what the taper is. Always look along every wall that you're doing so you know you have the chamfer and the taper under control everywhere. Okay, then that'll probably come out all right. And this one looks like it's a pretty good start. We'll take a look at it more later. But yeah, I'd probably change the taper a little bit to match this tooth over here, but you're off to a good start on that one. All right, cool. Okay. There we go. Okay. A little bit weird looking right now, isn't it? It's sort of irregular. That's my first impression. So let's see what we can do with the shoulder diamond first. So in every step we need to make sure we do it well before you do the next step. So let's go back to the facial reduction, make the depth cuts. 3 depth cuts, join together, angle the shoulder. Let's check your taper on the facial. Okay, so your taper was close. You're a little bit over tapered. But let's make a depth cut 1 millimeter above the gingula with 1 millimeter shoulder at the bottom. So let's see what that looks like. Got the ball burnisher? Okay, so keep that one handy. You don't need the other ones for right now. Okay, so let's look down this groove, and at the bottom, that's almost 1 millimeter, maybe 0.9. But see, you had nothing. In this area where you reduced it, you had no shoulder at all at the bottom. You had no shoulder over here. So the whole facial surface really wasn't reduced. Okay? You're getting a little bit more reduction here and here, but you didn't have anything there until we made this depth cut. So make sure you see everything that I do as I'm looking along here. So there's the taper, there's the angle that we want to reduce, and then we check looking down that groove, looking down that depth cut to make sure we have a millimeter at the bottom. Then when we do, then we make the other two depth cuts. Make sure you're happy with the taper. So about here, lean the burr toward the axis, a millimeter above the gingiva. Same thing over here. Make sure you have a nice 1 millimeter shoulder at the bottom of this one, bottom of that one, bottom of this one. Okay? Then we can start to connect together. Use the same taper that we used for the facial depth cut, and get rid of the excess that's in between. But make sure you check that taper over and over and over, and then keep working on it until you get a nice uniform shoulder around through here. Okay? So that's what we're looking for. So now we have the millimeter, okay, at the shoulder, all the way around there. Then we can angle the shoulder this way, all the way to the axial wall. So I'll just do the distal side here. Okay, so now let's take a look at the facial reduction. So this is the way it should have been right here, but see how little reduction you have on the mesial side? Yeah, their axial reduction at your shoulder is only like 0.2. This is 1 millimeter. That's what we need. And you got a little bit over tapered compared to this. Okay, now it's a central, so let's make it look a little bit flatter across the incisal edge. We want 2 millimeters reduction compared to the adjacent tooth. That's about right. Okay, so let's see if you can match the mesial side of this to the distal side. Compare the taper, compare the axial reduction at the shoulder, compare the angulation of the shoulder. Okay? Now, when we do the lingual and the proximal, we're going to do a chamfer, a nice little 0.5 millimeter chamfer. So this burr gives us the perfect chamfer. Use the mirror now and look along here. Now, again, how do we avoid hitting the adjacent tooth? So I asked you that question. I asked the class that question earlier. I said, if we want to avoid the adjacent tooth, what do? Go farther gingerly. Okay. So the fact that you didn't do it is what got you in trouble. So, and again, we always make sure we see the end of the burr at the margin. So I'm looking along the wall so I can see where the end of the burr is. I can see it's at the margin, and I can see the margin close to the gingiva. And I know I'm leaning the burr toward the adjacent tooth. So in this type of down, I don't even need to go to the 877. Well, maybe I would. There's a lot of damage on the lateral, so that gives me more room to take this burr through. Normally I just use the 877 burr and go through the proximal. But again, we're always looking along the wall. You've got to see the end of the burr at the surface of the tooth, wherever you are. You've got to see where you are gingially. But look how heavy your chamfer was here. Okay? And then make sure you have the burr leaning toward the axis when you're doing the chamfer. So we look along the wall pretty horizontally so you can see the taper, see the end of the burr at the margin, see the position gingially. And then everything works out real well. Okay, so finish the facial reduction on the mesial side. Make sure you have the chamfer coming around, joining the shoulders smoothly. As long as you've already angled the shoulder, then the chamfer can join it very smoothly right through here at the margin. Then we'll be okay. So see if you can make the mesial side look a little bit more like the distal side. All right, and then you can do the lingual fossa reduction coming up there.
Okay.
And, try not to start on the wrong tooth. All right? Okay, you got kind of carried away on the lingual side of the wrong tooth. All right, cool. Okay, so your proximal champers are looking a little better now. But let's check it with the ball burnisher. So slide the ball burnisher down here. Okay, so you got more axe reduction on the mesial side of the facial. You got sort of a funny edge here though. You didn't really get a nice angled shoulder around through there.
I have to.
Yeah, but you need to see what you should see. What you should see is looking this direction. When you angle the shoulder, you should be looking this way so you can see exactly what the burr is doing, right? Same thing over here. So you actually ended up with it horizontal here. I think I had that angled gingerly before. But now we have to come back and re-angle that shoulder. And again, we check it with the ball burnisher just to make sure that we've angled it. So if the ball burnisher slides off, then you angled it. If it doesn't slide off, then you haven't angled it. So we're going to hold the gingiva down, and then angle the shoulder here a little more cleanly. And then check it with the ball burnisher. If it slides off, then you actually angled it, right? Same thing over here. You can see it's horizontal here. You probably want to make it a little bit heavier and then lean the burr away from the wall so when we angle it, it doesn't leave anything unsupported at that margin. So now we've got it angled gingerly all the way around there. So that'll work. Your taper mesial distally is okay. In size reduction, probably a little too much. You're closer to 2.5 millimeters. Let's check the lingual clearance. So you don't have enough lingual clearance. See that? Your clearance is just 0.5 millimeter or so. So I was kind of concerned about that because you didn't have a whole lot of concavity on the lingual fossa. And there's the burr. So you're going to use this burr first on the lingual fossa. So just come up from the cingulum, come up all the way to the incisal edge, leave about 1 millimeter width, that's all you need to leave. Then back and forth from one marginal ridge to the other, back and forth. And then keep checking your clearances until you make sure you have enough clearance. Now we could do a little bit more right in this area. But basically it's pretty close. Now, we talked about how to keep the chamfer a little bit more under control later. Okay, but now we've got it pretty much working. All right, so start on the canine. Now, you don't have the right tooth here. Okay?
I'll change it.
Yeah, so put a number 5 in there. That looks like it's a number 12.
Okay, I'll change it.
Yeah, but then you get a contact with the canine, and that'll make things a lot better. And we're going to try to reduce the proximal surface on the canine without hitting the adjacent teeth so much.
Sure, I'll
Okay.
do it, sir.
All right, cool.
Thank you, doctor.
Yep. All right, let's take a peek. Okay, so your central, you got some margins that are what we call ski jumps, right?
Yeah.
See on the mesial side, that's sort of a classic ski jump. And then, again, the way we test it is take the ball burnisher and slide it down the wall. If it doesn't slide off, it's a ski jump.
Yeah.
If it slides off, then it's more of a chamfer. It's not sliding off in several places here. If it doesn't slide off the shoulder, then you know it's not angled. Okay, so let's go to the chamfer burr and see if we can fix those ski jumps, because we have to fix them. Now when you do the proximal reduction without this burr, that's pretty dangerous. Okay, but we can look through here and see where the end of the burr is. Just make sure it stays at the surface and always get a perfect chamfer. Look through here. You had the end of the burr pretty far inside the tooth. So you had the end of your burr right here instead of at the margin. Big, huge ski jump. So look along the wall Make sure you see the end of the burr at the surface, all the way along there. And then you can make it join the shoulder smoothly here, as long as you have the shoulder angled gingerly. Now we got rid of the ski jumps and so forth. But when the chamfer gets this heavy, it's really easy to make a ski jump. So then you have to come back and drop it gingerly at the margin so you can get rid of any possible ski jump. But again, the only way we can do it is to look along the wall, and the only way to do that is to use the mirror effectively. Okay, so you haven't made a depth cut on the facial here.
Okay.
Okay, so when you look at the bottom of that depth cut, there's nothing there.
Okay.
So look over here. There's nothing at the bottom. There's no shoulder. So don't make any other depth cuts until you finish this one. So here's the taper. So your taper's not that far off, but cut inward until at the bottom of the depth cut you see a shoulder that looks about this big. You have nothing at all. Right? So keep working on that one. Okay. Okay, so for the central, okay, so we do the ball burnisher test, right? So I'm coming down here, but the ball burnisher doesn't slide off that margin right there. So see how horizontal that is right in there? That's a problem. So you need to make sure the ball burnisher is always going to be sliding off. So you had a really big shoulder, and
I tried to.
yeah, so you don't have it angled all the way to the margin. Your shoulder was actually smaller before. I think when you tried to change the taper, you didn't change it, so you ended up making the shoulder bigger. And so the taper over here is a little bit of an issue too. So we still don't have the taper fixed. So the way we fix that is to look along the wall so we can see the taper. We can compare it to the adjacent tooth right here. So here's the taper you want, right? But that's not what you did. You did this. This is the taper you want, right down to the shoulder. And then so you're super subgingival, aren't you? So we don't want to be anywhere near that subgingival. But you'd want to make sure that the shoulder slopes gingerly all the way to the margin. But right here, there's a catch at that margin. So even if you're subgingival, even if you have a shoulder that's way too big, at least make sure it slopes gingerly all the way to the margin. In this case, we have to hold the gingiva down when we try to fix some of this. So don't be going so deep gingerly. That's why when you make the depth cuts, we stay a millimeter above the gingiva. Now, I think I broke off some of your undermined enamel in one place where you had to go subgingival to fix that, though.
That's right, on the distal side.
But again, make sure you always see the end of the burr when you're using a chamfer burr. Make sure you always see the end of the burr at the surface. Here. Not here. And taper about like this, not like this. But make sure you see the end of the burr right there at the margin all the time. Then you always get a beautiful chamfer. You can't possibly get a ski jump if the end of the burr is at the margin. When you use this burr right, you automatically get a great chamfer. So that's what we need to be doing. But you got to be looking along the wall in order to know that you're using the burr right. You got to see the end of the burr at the surface.
My whole burr is on the margin instead of half.
Well, the end of your burr is inside the tooth. It's all a matter of where the end of the burr is. If it's at the margin, you're perfect. If it's inside the tooth, then you got a big problem. And at the same time, really watch your tapers. And then I would have made this wall a little shorter here by reducing the cingulum a little bit more. Typically, that's what you're looking for. Your clearance is just about enough. Okay, so anyway, that was coming along. So this one, okay, let's check the taper. So that's number one. Make sure we have the right taper when you're doing the depth cuts on the facial. So we check the taper compared to the middle third of the adjacent tooth. So here's the taper we want, right? But that's not what you did.
It's not.
No, here's the taper you want.
That. I was trying to place
Yeah.
the taper.
So here's the taper of the middle third
Okay,
of
so
the
we don't have
adjacent
to
tooth.
place the taper like this,
Like what?
like straight on this, like this.
What do you mean straight?
Sorry.
Remember that word? So what I suggested is you make a mark in
take
the
the
middle
taper.
third of the adjacent tooth. So let's make a mark in the middle third of the adjacent tooth, right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the burr and you touch the mark.
Oh, okay, that's the taper.
You
Okay.
can't miss. If you touch the mark, that's the right taper.
Okay. I thought
Okay.
there's a gap between the margin and the burr, so I did again the vertical.
Yeah, so your depth cut should have been at this angle, exactly like this. Middle third, right there. Right down to the shoulder. That's the taper you want. So your shoulder is not bad. You have a reasonable size to the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're doing the mesial
And then
side,
I was checking with the ball.
yeah, so we'll check that. So your shoulder seems to be reasonable, but then we're connecting together. We use this taper here. So there's the taper from the depth cut. So the shoulder is exactly the same. I left your shoulder exactly the way it was.
Okay.
But now look at this. Toward the incisal, I have, by the time I make the secondary plane like this, in this area, you've under-reduced by 1.5 millimeters. Okay?
Because of the wrong taper.
Because of the wrong taper. Yeah, you lean it out. And you probably would have gotten an undercut, but you're way under-reduced up in the incisal area. So that's really important to keep under control. Now, so you've angled the shoulder here. Have you angled it enough? Let's see. Just have to check to see if the ball burnisher slides off. Okay, so not too bad there. Over here you got a problem.
Mm-hmm. I'm going on the...
You're going to have to go, you'll have to go subgingival to angle the shoulder here.
Okay. So on the interproximal, when I'm going...
No, we're talking about the embrasures, the facial embrasures.
Okay.
When you're doing the facial shoulder into the embrasures, wherever you are, you want to make sure you angle the shoulder gingivally. Mm-hmm. You don't want to have to go subgingival, but if you need to, you have to. Okay. But the ball burnisher has to slide off. Mm-hmm. Then you know you've got an angled shoulder. And interproximally, see this area here? Mm-hmm. So how do we avoid hitting the adjacent tooth?
Go gingivally.
Yeah, and you didn't do that. Right?
That's what my question was. I'm going gingivally, then is it okay? Like sometimes I go too gingival and then again it goes.
Well,
I have to see where the.
If you want to avoid hitting the adjacent tooth, you go gingivally, but not too far. Mm-hmm. This is not far enough.
Yeah.
That would have been far enough. Now, we can look from the lingual. And by the way, people that try to do the proximal reduction from the facial without having done the lingual chamfer first usually get in trouble.
Okay, so first I have to do the lingual.
I think it's actually a harder way to do it. But again, when you're looking from the lingual in the mirror and coming around here, keep the margin near the gingiva all the way along there. Again, I'm looking along the wall so I can see where the margin is, I can see where the end of the burr is. Mm-hmm. If you come through like that, then you'll be closer to the gingiva and it's easier to go through without hitting the adjacent tooth. Makes it much easier. And look this way along this area and this way along this area. Then it's going to be a lot easier. But most people end up with big ski jumps and undercuts when they try to do the proximal from the facial side.
So we have to go from the lingual side.
That certainly makes it easier.
Okay.
Okay. And then make sure that when you do the incisal reduction, you angle the incisal edge this way toward the palate. It doesn't go toward the facial. But come back right away and reduce the distal half of the facial to match what I did on the mesial side. Mm-hmm. Then you can make the whole thing work.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Okay, so we looked at your central before, and let me see, you got the ball burnisher? Yep. I want to double check. Okay, it's a little bit questionable right here. So you want to really look hard to see if you have anything that's horizontal that might be like a ski jump. So So really look for those things. You want to, oh, see right there? That's looking a little ski jumpy. So don't take any chances. You can hold the gingiva down and use your chamfer burr and fix that up just fine. Okay. Extruduction, minimal over here. Minimal over here. Try to bring a full millimeter right into the embrasure, right into the embrasure here. Oops. How can we have so little clearance? Okay, so sometimes that happens when people over taper the facial. So your facial taper should have been like this. By the way, your shoulder is too steep actually. This is a reasonable angle. It should have been about like this, not quite so steep. But anyway, here's the taper you wanted. You got a little bit over tapered, and then you made a secondary plane that's also a little bit over tapered. So if the shoulder's the right size, if the extruduction's the right size here, which it is, then you've over-reduced facially up in this area especially.
Okay.
So when you do the lingual reduction, you're going to expect to have this edge less than 1 millimeter because you've got to get the clearance. Okay? All right, so you started on the canine. You got a little problem here, huh? What's going on there?
Yeah.
You've cut underneath that wall for some reason. I suspect that you didn't have enough extruduction in that area to begin with at the shoulder. But I'm a little nervous about your taper here. This should have been the taper all the way down to the shoulder. So let's see what we can do here. Okay. Okay, so looking along this wall, so you want this taper exactly like the middle third right down to the shoulder. Don't be leaning out at the bottom. So this is the taper you want right down to the shoulder. But you're a little bit subgingival on the shoulder too, which gives a little extra complexity. Then you can make your depth cuts a little more clear in the embrasures. But then when you angle the shoulder, in your case, you're going to have to hold the gingiva down, huh? Because it's subgingival right now. If I wanted to re-angle it, okay, when you re-angle it, don't touch the axial. Don't cut into the axial. Just look this way so you know you're angling it to the axial, but not into the axial. Okay? You can always check to make sure you have the slope. Okay, so now we got the right taper. Before you do anything else, get the incisal reduction. Your incisal reduction is less than 1 millimeter, so get that. Then do your secondary plane on the facial.
We can use this burr for that?
For the incisal reduction? Yeah, you can use pretty much any burr. Okay? But get the incisal reduction done so when you do the proximal, the walls aren't so tall. Okay? That 877 burr, you know, it won't cut a really tall wall. And when you do the proximal reduction, you know, most people find it much easier to do from the lingual approach.
I started from the
facial, yeah. And people try that, and it's this, you have to be really
good.
Yeah, to make that work. It just seems to be easier to just make a nice chamfer along here. You have to learn how to look from the lingual anyway. So when you make a nice chamfer along here, and then you just bring it through like you saw me do, bring it through that area. It's a little bit more certain. To go from a shoulder to a chamfer before you really have the chamfer is problematic for a lot of people. And again, you got to make sure that the chamfer and the shoulder join smoothly, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. I mean, it can be done doing it from the facial, but again, most people aren't successful. So learn how to look from the lingual and do all these walls, and that's going to be a big benefit. A lot of times people say, I want to do everything from the facial because I don't want to use the ball burnisher. Sorry, I don't want to use the mirror. Well, learn how to use the mirror, and life gets easier. And by the way, this is no, that's okay. All right. Okay, you got a fair amount of damage on some of these teeth in your typodont, so you want to be removing damaged teeth pretty soon too. Anyways, to finish this up, but the next thing you want to do is the incisor reduction, and then the secondary plane. And then you can finish up.
Okay.
All right, cool. Mm-hmm.